Hello everybody. Welcome into another video. It's been a long time since I've made one. I've been having a lot of thoughts circling around in my head as this BYU fall camp opens up for the 2025 season. And there's a number of narratives around BYU football that are just kind of pet peeves of mine. And so I thought I'd address some of these and talk about them and maybe look at some film from last year kind of as we go through them to, I don't know, maybe demonstrate some of the things that bother me with some of these narratives. So the first narrative that bothers me a little bit going into this upcoming BYU season is that the football team really only needs a game manager because we've got great offensive weapons, and so we don't need the quarterback to do a whole lot for us. And I get what people are saying in a way when they say this, because I do think that BYU has some pretty good offensive weapons. But I wonder from a practical standpoint what exactly people mean by that. BYU, I think, has one of the best running back rooms that they have had in a long time. LJ Martin is returning. He's been hampered by injuries in his first few years. He's been very good, but he's had to miss time in both of his seasons so far. And that's the only reason why he hasn't been a 1,000-yard rusher yet. Behind LJ Martin, I believe the next best running back on the team is Sione Moa, and that's even if we have the return of Hinckley Ropati, which is still somewhat up in the air, it seems like. Hinckley Ropati is really awesome. He's been good for us for the last 2 years, especially last year. But I think Sione Moa has a potential to be significantly better than Hinckley Ropati ever was, and to some degree even push LJ Martin a little bit. That's how good I think Sione Moa is. So from a pure running perspective, I think that BYU, that narrative of we just need a guy who can get the ball to weapons, if what we mean by that is we just need a guy who can hand the ball off, then I think there may be some truth to that. I think that BYU could have some success this year, kind of going with a 2022, let's see, which bowl game was that? I believe it was the New Mexico Bowl where we played SMU and Jaron Hall was hurt, and we played Soljay Mayava-Peters. And I think we maybe threw like 3 passes the whole game. And that strategy, at least for that game, we were able to come out with a win. Now, I don't think BYU can be successful next year only throwing 3 passes a game. But I do think that BYU, with TJ Woods at the head of the offensive line, and I have a lot of confidence in the guys we have on the offensive line this year, and with this running back room, I have a lot of confidence that we can kind of take a run-heavy approach and find a lot of success this year. But you still need the quarterback to be able to get yourself in the right looks. Guys like John Beck, who have kind of some insider information to what is asked of BYU quarterbacks, he often talks about how BYU quarterbacks are expected to get the team in the right look, to make adjustments at the line of scrimmage, to slide protections, to flip plays if needed, things like that. And so I one of the common narratives I hear is let's just put Bear Bachmeier in there and let's run the ball a lot because he's big and he's a good runner. And I think that might work, but also I think expecting Bear to be able to step in where he didn't even have spring to prepare, to be able to step in and orchestrate the offense, even if you're not asking a lot out of him from a passing perspective, just from a getting lined up in the right formations, getting the right thing called, all of those checks that I mentioned, I think that is a little bit unrealistic for an 18-year-old kid coming right out of high school who didn't even have a spring ball to learn the offense. So anyway, even in the running game, you need a quarterback who's smart enough and has had enough experience and reps in the system to be able to orchestrate the offense. And then we come to some of the perimeter weapons. You know, you can't just hand the ball off to your players. And so people look at the perimeter weapons BYU has, and they say, wow, we've got these great perimeter weapons. And I agree, we do have some really good wide receivers. I think Carson Ryan is going to be a really good tight end for us. But I think this is kind of where the narrative of we just need a game manager kind of falls apart. If you ask pretty much any BYU fan who our top pass catcher is going to be this year, it's Chase Roberts. That's the obvious solution. Chase Roberts is an absolute beast. But Chase Roberts isn't the type of receiver that you just kind of get the ball to him and expect him to go to work. He's not a Puka Nacua type receiver. He's not even, he's not even the Keelan Marion type receiver. Chase Roberts is a fantastic possession receiver. And that's not to say that he can't run after the catch at all. But Chase Roberts has never demonstrated a great ability to get yards after the catch. He's the type of guy who runs great routes, who catches the ball extremely well, but he's a guy who gets the ball primarily in the intermediate area of the field, and that's where he's at his best. This play is a perfect example of how we use Chase Roberts best. Chase is lined up right here in the slot. I think Chase might be at his best coming out of a slot as kind of a power slot receiver. And right here, he's just going to kind of run a deep over or a dig route there out of the slot. And that's where Chase does a lot of his damage, kind of over the intermediate middle part of the field. And so we need a quarterback not only who can get us into the right plays on the running game, we need guys who can deliver the ball downfield to Chase Roberts. This isn't a Puka Nacua that we can just give jet sweeps and end arounds to and expect him to go 60 yards. Chase needs a guy who can deliver him the ball downfield. I think Carson Ryan is the same way. A lot of people have been extremely high on Carson Ryan. I think Carson Ryan is going to be an upgrade over any tight end that we had on the team last year. However, I don't know if I'm quite as high on Carson Ryan as some BYU fans are. He played at UCLA, and he was, I think, good at UCLA, but not great. Transferred to Utah, and yeah, he was behind some really, really talented tight ends at Utah, but we have yet to see Carson Ryan really demand the ball and demand to be in that starting role. So I think we maybe need to wait and see just a little bit with him. Like I said, I think he is going to be good, but I think people who are expecting the second coming of Dennis Pitta or something like that might be slightly disappointed this year with him. But again, he's another guy. He's going to probably need the ball delivered to him downfield. Most of our receivers are that way. Parker Kingston is a guy that we can get the ball to in the screen game, in the end around game, jet sweep game, and he can do some damage in those areas. But a lot of our guys, a lot of our really good offensive weapons, think about JoJo Phillips, who I think is going to have a big year, even though we really haven't seen him utilized a whole lot. He's a downfield deep threat. Most of our receivers, and so this is why I have an issue with this. We just need a game manager narrative, is because I think that you need a guy who can do more than just hand the ball off, and we have guys on the offensive side who need the ball delivered to them downfield. And so I guess that's where I don't understand. I don't understand this narrative very much. I think what's going to be expected of the BYU quarterback this year is essentially the same stuff that we expected of Jake last year. We need a guy who can get us into the right plays. We need a guy who can be at least a moderate threat in the run game, because A-Rod's offensive have shown that they function best when there's an element of the quarterback run game. And we need a guy who can deliver the ball, especially off of play action deep down the field at times, as well as running some of the intermediate stuff that the A-Rod utilizes. So I understand the narrative to some extent, but I do think when people talk about the weapons, the offensive weapons that BYU has this year, I kind of wonder which weapons exactly they are referring to. Because if the person they're referring to is Chase Roberts, he's a guy who needs the ball downfield. If they're talking about Carson Ryan, he's a guy who probably needs the ball downfield. JoJo Phillips, same way. A lot of these guys. So we are going to need an element of a strong passing game if we're going to get it to our weapons effectively. And so I kind of like I alluded to earlier, I don't see a scenario where Bear Bachmeier is your starting quarterback week 1. I just think that that's too much to expect. Offenses are too complex, and asking a kid who is 18 right out of high school, didn't have spring ball, is maybe a recipe for setting Bear up for failure, and we don't want that. So I fully expect it to be either Trayson Bourget or McKay Hillstead, and we will just have to see which of those guys can deliver and can deliver best. It'll be very interesting to see. This next play really highlights one of the ways that I think BYU can find success this year, utilizing 2 running back sets. So BYU comes out here in 21 personnel. That's your 2 running backs, LJ Martin and Sione Moa, as well as a tight end, Ray Paulo. Incidentally, I think that the backup tight end spot, whoever's playing behind Carson Ryan, is a narrative that isn't being talked about at all by BYU media, but I think is actually a really crucial position. BYU runs a lot of multiple tight end sets, and no one's really talking about who's going to be some of the guys who really get a lot of snaps, some of those backup tight ends that are primarily used as blockers. So BYU, especially later in the season, ran a lot of multiple running back sets with Sione Moa and LJ Martin. I think that they can do some really creative things with misdirection, which A-Rod is really good at. And so watch this play and some of the misdirection and confusion that you see, where you've got linebackers, they're all flowing the wrong way because of the threat of LJ, and Sione is able to walk into the end zone untouched. I expect to see a fair amount of these 2 running back sets with the 2 of those. I also would not be surprised at all if BYU runs quite a bit of 3 running back sets. And you can get you can get Pokai Haunga into the game, who's got a lot of offensive versatility as a receiver and a runner. If Hinckley Rapati's back, you can use him in that role as well. So I expect to see a lot of multiple running back sets this year. I hope we see that, just because I thought whenever we went to that last year, it was highly successful. So with the blocking scheme on this play that we just watched, this looks like outside zone to me, going to the left. And then BYU often runs their tight end across the formation and then comes back to cut off any backside pursuit. That's what the offensive line, it looks like everyone's stepping left, blocking left there. I think that's Waylon Lapuaho. They're getting up to the second level. And so that's what the blocking scheme looks like here, but there's kind of a delay with the fake pitch outside to LJ Martin, which holds the linebackers. But to me, that running scheme or the blocking scheme looks more like outside zone than like a true counter. That the running back action here looks almost like a counter, but the blocking to me doesn't really look like counter blocking. So anyway, a lot of creativity in the run game from A-Rod, and I think some of that sort of stuff, along with just how good of an offensive line coach I believe TJ Woods is, is going to lead to a lot of offensive success for BYU. Another narrative that is somewhat related to the first, or at least to some of the things I've been talking about, is that Bear Bachmeier is going to pick up the offensive playbook really, really quickly because his brother graduated from Stanford quickly. I don't know why this one bothers me so much. There are families that are smarter. I do think Bear is a smart kid. He comes from a smart family. But this narrative just kind of bugs me. I mean, you're trying to tell me none of you guys have a family member who's smarter or dumber than you are. I mean, it just kind of seems like a silly thing to equate graduating quickly with another brother picking up the playbook really fast. If anything, I think that Bear Bachmeier's ability to pick up a playbook quickly would coincide more with his ability to move up into the backup quarterback spot at Stanford so quickly. After spring ball at Stanford, people were saying he was kind of the clear-cut number 2 guy there, which is impressive for a freshman, although Stanford has been a dumpster fire for a number of years. And then the other thing is the fact that his brother Hank has been a college quarterback at multiple teams, had to pick up multiple playbooks. So if anything, Bear Bachmeier's older brother Hank, to me, is maybe a better predictor of Bear's ability to pick up a playbook than Tiger is, just because maybe Bear has been able to pick up some pointers from his brother Hank. Again, that's kind of a dumb thing to find annoying, but for some reason I just kind of find that narrative just a little bit annoying. There's BYU. They're running out of kind of that diamond formation that they used to run a lot with Taysom Hill back in the go fast, go hard era. And that's kind of a creative play. It looks like they're kind of doing they're drawing people away and then they're running Keelan Marion on a wheel route out of the backfield. That's some creative stuff from A-Rod. Yeah, I like that play design. I think you could see a few different players doing that. I think you could see Parker Kingston doing a little bit of that this year. You could see Pokai Haunga kind of playing that role. The departure of Keelan Marion is really interesting. Who's going to take kind of that Puka role, the Keelan role, the guy who is a downfield receiver but is also doing a lot of handoffs and jet sweeps and some of the creative stuff in the offense will be interesting. I think some of the guys that could step into that role, Tiger Bachmeier, Cody Hagan, Parker Kingston, and Pokai Haunga, I think are probably the main guys who could pick up some of the slack where Keelan Marion is gone. Now, the area where I do agree with people that the BYU quarterback just kind of needs to be a game manager type is we need a guy who can limit turnovers. And right here, this play, this is just Jake moving too fast, but throughout his career at BYU, Jake was kind of a high variance type player. He made a lot of incredible plays. He won us a lot of games because of his ability to be clutch in end of game type situations. But then we got a lot of this type of stuff too, especially his first year at BYU, the number of fumbles he had on the quarterback running back exchange. This sort of stuff just kind of kills you. He threw a lot of interceptions. So I do think that while it's tough to expect more out of our quarterbacks than we had last year with Jake, because Jake was pretty good last year, I do think that if we can have a guy who limits turnovers and some of the big costly plays that Jake made on a fairly regular basis, that we can approximate how good we were last year, even with the uncertainty that we have right now at quarterback. The other narrative that just kind of bothers me, and this has been something that I've been harping on for years, really ever since Jay Hill got here, and I did a deep dive into what Jay Hill actually does as a defensive coordinator. Um, Most BYU fans and people in the media who cover BYU, I think either don't understand a lot of the things that BYU does defensively, or they just don't care, or they think that us as a fan base and as viewers are kind of dumb and don't care. Um, so the narrative around BYU football and our defense is that we run a 4-3 defense. The truth of the matter is that because of the way football is played these days with the prevalence of the spread offense, BYU runs a nickel defense like 90% of the time. I haven't charted every single game of the Jay Hill era at BYU, but in every game that I have charted, BYU is in nickel for at least 90% of the game. Every time the offense comes out with with three receivers or more, three wide receivers or more, BYU runs a nickel. It's cause and effect. If Jay Hill sees three receivers or more, he puts in his nickel. The other thing that now a lot of people will acknowledge that BYU runs a lot of nickel. The thing that a lot of people don't understand or don't care to mention is that BYU also runs two different variations or personnel packages within their nickel packages. So right now, BYU is running this sort of looks like a 4-2, but this player right here is actually Jack Kelly. So right now, BYU is in a 3-3-5 nickel. You've got Banya, you've got Nelson, you've got Batty as your defensive lineman. This is Ice Moa here, Isaiah Glasker, and Jack Kelly. Looks like he's coming on a blitz here. When I track which of the different nickel personnel packages BYU runs, it's pretty equal between running a true 4-2-5 nickel, where you would basically you probably have Blake Mangelson right here, and then you take off one of your linebackers. And then BYU also runs a ton of 3-3-5. For the most part, what I observe Jay Hill doing is that BYU starts the game in 4-2-5, and then they usually just exchange series. So on the next defensive series, if the offense is still putting out a lighter personnel package, then BYU or Jay Hill puts in his 3-3-5. The only time mid-drive that I usually see a switch from one to the other is on obvious passing situations, like right here, we're in 3rd and 11. Jay Hill almost always goes to the 3-3-5 so that he has a little bit more flexibility with what he can do with rushes, with bringing blitzes from different places. We know that Jay Hill likes to create havoc and confusion in where the pressure is coming from. And also it gives you another linebacker on the field in case you just want to rush 3 and drop 8. It gives you a little bit more competent players to drop back into coverage. So I would say that's one of my biggest pet peeves just in BYU football in general, is just the lack of understanding, or maybe it really is just the people do understand that that's how BYU functions defensively, but they just think that we as viewers are dumb and don't care. But the truth about the BYU defense is I think a lot different than how it's sometimes portrayed. Now, this year, projecting forward what we're going to do this year, I think we are going to play a lot of 3-3-5, just like we have for the last 2 seasons. Now, who plays this middle spot in the 3-3-5, I think is going to be very interesting. Obviously, Keanu Tanavasa is the big name of a guy who can play that interior defensive line spot. And I think he will. I think there will be times where Keanu does play that middle guy when we just have 3 linemen in the game. Last year, though, at Utah, occasionally Utah also did a 3-down lineman set when they were in a nickel. And there were times when Keanu was playing one of these outside spots. And so I think that Keanu, one of the things that's so great about him is he brings versatility. He can play anywhere from a head up zero technique where he's right over the top of the center. I think the place where he's mostly going to play is probably a 3 technique where he is in between the tackle and the guard. But I think we will see him moved all the way out at times to a 4 technique where he's right on the tackle, maybe even to a 5 where he's on the outside shade of the tackle. I think when BYU goes to 3-3-5, there are going to be times where we see Justin Kirkland at this nose spot, and we're going to see Tanavasa at one of these edge spots, as well as one of our other defensive ends out here as well. Especially if they are looking to do that lighter set with only 3D linemen, but they want some guys that can really hold their own against the run. I think that would be a really good move for them to use Keanu Tanavasa in that way at times. This sort of play is really where we're going to miss Tyler Batty, though, because we just see he was so good against the run. Tyler Batty was maybe always a little bit of a disappointment as a pass rusher, just with his sack numbers never getting up to where we would have hoped. But he was just so dominant in the run game. Right here, it kind of seems like they have the perfect play set up. Jack Kelly is looping around here for kind of a game that the defensive line is running here. And Nelson is double teamed. He can't get there, but Batty just easily shrugs off this offensive tackle and gets in there to make that tackle. Batty was phenomenal as a run defender, and I do think that we are going to miss him. I think that we have some decent defensive ends coming in, but probably no one that's going to be as dominant against the run as Tyler Batty was. All right, guys, that pretty much does it for this video. Those are kind of the BYU football narratives that just kind of have been on my mind lately that I thought have maybe been a little annoying or maybe misconstrued a little bit. I will say here's a play where you see BYU actually with 4 defensive linemen and 3 linebackers on the field. So I talk a lot about how BYU plays majority of the time in a nickel, but every now and then we don't. We play more of a traditional base defense. And so you see them doing that here. This is actually interesting because all of us who watched the team play a lot in the Bronco Mendenhall era probably look at this front that BYU is running and we count, okay, we got what looks like an outside linebacker, and 3 linemen. We're running a 3-4 defense here. And the answer to that is no. This is still a 4-3 that BYU runs here, and I can kind of show you what's actually happening here. BYU's in what's called an under front here, which is when the defensive line kind of slides to the weak side of the formation. So you've got the strength over here. You do have a tight end over here on this side of the formation and like an H-back right here, but you've got your receivers out on this side. So depending on how a defense classifies it, I think most teams... It depends on how defense is classified, but I think most teams would say that this is the strength of the formation is to the right here. And so what they do is that the 3 technique is over to the weak side of the formation. The 1 technique is right here. You've got a defensive end. This is the bull end or the strong end. Viliami Puha's in here right now. And then Logan Latui is out on the outside. And then what the defense does, they bring their Sam linebacker down, which is Isaiah Glasker, and he's playing right here. So it kind of looks like you've just got those 2 off-ball linebackers and 2 stand-up ends, kind of like in a 3-4, but really this is defensive end, linebacker, and you kind of have a defensive slide to the weak side. That's called an under front that BYU is doing right here. So anyway, every now and then you do see BYU running, but again, that's because why are they running that 4-3? Why do they have that personnel package in? Well, it's because there's 2 tight ends, only 2 receivers, which some teams run a lot of that, and so in those games where you play teams that are more traditional in their personnel packages, you're going to see more of that. Versus right here, you see they're back in a nickel. Jacob Robinson's playing in that inside spot. So anyway, hope you guys have a good day. Hope you enjoyed the video and listening to me gripe about things that annoy me with BYU football. I think we're going to have a really good season despite some of the uncertainty on the team, especially at the quarterback position, because I think our defense is going to be a nightmare for teams this year. And I think that our offense can have a lot of success, even with a quarterback without a whole lot of experience. So have a good day, everybody. Thanks for watching.